Yes.
Well, I'm certainly here.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so am I. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Thomas. Hi, Julian. Thomas
nice
is
t-shirt, isn't it?
Oh yeah, the best T-Shirt of all. Thomas Hansen kommt aus Dänemark, Julian Smith in England. Der Vortrag wird also auf Englisch gehalten. Thomas, Julian, you now have to compete with a rather dry topic such as authentication against reporting on the consumption of fast food and French fries just before lunch breaks. So good luck with that.
Well, let's see if we can build up an appetite instead of the opposite. Okay. Well, I'm gonna leave all the talking to Julian to start with, and then I'll jump on and do a demo in a bit.
Well, thanks very much, Mike, Thomas. I hope you can see the screen and hear me. Otherwise, it's going to be a very short presentation.
No, all is well.
Oh, good. All right, guys. Thanks very much for being online and listening to this the presentation on SECURABLE. Yes, it's a very, very boring topic, but hopefully we can try and make it as useful as possible and give you some information about what we've been doing here. So we're, as Mike said, we're located in the UK and Denmark. We're very, very much into Docker and CI/CD automation, everything like that. When we say we do everything we can in containers, we literally mean that. Everything that we do is based on Docker or Kubernetes or anything like that. It just makes life so much easier. As you'll see in the demo, when we fire up a stack that would be normally very complicated to set up. So what is SECURABLE? Well, we've developed it as a solution for authentication and for policies and ACLs so that we can assign fine-grained control to permissions for people. Now, this sort of thing, traditionally is very, very complicated and difficult in open edge applications. But it also manages secrets and decryption, encryption services with token management, and something that's really funky is dynamic credentials. So we can dynamically create credentials for things like AWS or Azure on the fly without the user having to know any of the details. It's supplied as a REST-based service, so everything that is done in SECURABLE is through APIs, and we eat our own dog food, so the front end of SECURABLE uses all of the APIs of SECURABLE. There's no hidden secrets or anything like that. As we say, we try and use everything in Docker because it makes life so much easier for us. So we've got several bits of technology put together in a stack that's just delivered as a single package that's just span up very, very quickly and easily. So yeah, we've got a few things in there. One of the things that's not on that info at the moment is RabbitMQ as well. So we have a messaging service built in there. So SECURABLE is what we call sealed by default. So all the secrets, everything like that is protected. It's sealed by what's called Shamir secrets. So you have effectively a password that is split into several keys, and you can specify what number of keys is needed to decrypt the master key. So basically, if someone goes on holiday, for example, you don't have an issue because that person's key isn't necessarily needed as long as you have a quorum. So our default is 5 keys, of which 3 is needed to unseal the system. And originally, I set it up so we have 7 of 9 keys available. Now, probably all you Star Trek nerds would probably understand why I chose that particular set of circumstances. So for authentication, what we set out to do was provide a single user with multiple forms of authentication, so that it doesn't matter how you logged in, you are always the same user as far as SECURABLE is concerned, and therefore OpenEdge or PASOE. So you can have the standard username and password, or the Active Directories. You can supply TLS certificates if you needed to, Radius, or OpenID, or OAuth, which covers a wide variety of providers like Keycloak or Azure, Auth0, AWS, Google, etc., etc. So what does that mean? If you have a quick look here, so Thomas's entity, or user as we call it, here has actually 4 different authentication mechanisms. You can either log in through the Notable Active Directory or through SECURABLE itself, which is a username and password, or going through the Notable Azure Active Directory, which is actually synced to our Active Directory anyway, so it's basically the same thing. But he's also got an Auth0 account there. And when he chooses to log in there on the left, he can choose any one of those authentication services to log in with. As we said, everything's an API. So all of this just is callable from within ABL as well. We've also added time-based one-time passwords, or TOTP as we call them. So for anything that needs a username and password or user interaction, you can specify that it has to be secured with the time-based one-time password as well. Now, the most popular thing for that is the Google Authenticator. Maybe you've seen it, or maybe you've used that. But just by scanning the barcode, you can add SECURABLE or your version of SECURABLE to Google Authenticator and have this time-based password stuff, which is very, very cool. Very nerdy, but very cool. So let's talk about some secrets now. As we said, a secret is any sensitive information. You guys probably know this more than most people, but API keys and SSL keys, encryption, passwords, and we put at the bottom there anything that can make the news. So if something's leaked or put into a GitHub repository, which has happened on numerous occasions, where someone's put the certificates required to encrypt the drone firmware, for example, that's just gone into a public repository. SECURABLE helps you stop that from happening. So we provide a secure source for this. It has to be mentioned that all this data is secured at rest, automatically, or encrypted at rest. So if you get access to the database, for want of a better word, you can't decrypt it. The operator access we can do through paths, so you can specify who can access which parts of the secrets, or the tree of secrets, as we call it. So you can say that users can access this branch and developers can access that branch, etc., etc. So users can't see the developers' secrets and vice versa. We also have secrets that are stored in what we call the cubby hole. So when you log in, you get a token, and that token has its own secret store that no one else can read. And when you log out, or when that token expires or is revoked, those secrets disappear as well. So it's very, very secure and kept very secret. So again, we're talking about the database credentials, PGP keys, all that sort of stuff. So how can we do that? So understanding who's got access to which secrets is very difficult. If your developers need AWS keys to access some data held up there, how do they get those keys? Where do they store those keys, etc.? So it's very, very difficult to track this and follow this. And this is where we've hopefully got SECURABLE kicking in or stepping in for this. So each secret is a key value pair. They're encrypted before writing them to the disk. So again, they're encrypted at rest. By default, each key can be 32 megs. Obviously, we can configure that. And think of the tree of secrets like folders in a disk drive. You know, each folder has its own permissions. Each permission is assigned to a policy. Policies are assigned to user groups, and users are assigned to user groups. So you can specify just by assigning groups and policies who can access which keys on the secrets. So, for example, you could say that the developer group has access to anything within this branch, and admin group has access to these functions. Now, that's just for secrets, but what we'll show a little bit later is that we've also applied the same policy to ACLs, so you can start specifying parts of the system that are available to people or groups of people as well. On to dynamic credentials. Now, this is one of the things that takes a little bit of time to understand, or it did me, but when you understand what it does, it's quite amazing, because we can generate credentials on demand for databases, Azure, Google Cloud, AWS, without knowing anything or any of the secrets required to log on with that. So just by logging on to SECURABLE using my Active Directory or using the username or password, I can generate the information I need to access AWS or Rabbit or anything like that. And that's again based down to policies and groups. So for example, when an application needs to access a S3 bucket, you just call an API. If you've logged in, you call the API and it will send you back the client ID and the client secret that you need to then log on to AWS. When each set of credentials can have a time to live or a TTL, so you can also define very, very short-lived credentials. For example, if you're going to just do one quick upload, you can generate a credential that's valid for 30 seconds. So only that one call can use those credentials. So even if they got leaked somehow, they wouldn't be able to be used because they'd be revoked within 30 seconds. And that's up to you when you define the roles on this. You can basically say how long you want each secret to last, and when you log out, those credentials are automatically revoked as well. As I said, there's no need to provide any other credentials to the client. As long as they can log in and have been given permission, they can generate their own credentials, generated on demand. And obviously we have a full audit trail, so you know which keys were generated when. Obviously the secrets themselves aren't stored, but you know that a request was made. And a little nerdy joke there, you know, our dynamic credentials are just like our slides. They're created just in time, right before you need them. Yeah, I won't say when we were working on this presentation, but it's just in time. So encryption. Encryption is very, very hard to do right. Very hard to do right. And very difficult to find cross-platform tools and utilities that allow you to do this. We've provided encryption and decryption as a service through an API now. Now, we don't store this, so the data isn't stored in SECURABLE, but you pass in something that you want encrypting. You specify the key that you want to use, which you've defined in SECURABLE, and then you get it back as encrypted. So you can then store, So you can then store the result of this in an OpenEdge database. So you're in charge of the data, but it's encrypted automatically. So you can store individual fields if you're wanting as encrypted data, and then only allow certain people to access those fields by calling the API to decrypt them. For OpenEdge systems, we've created a class or a set of classes that you can use to call the SECURABLE API. So it literally is as simple as calling SDK : login or SDK encrypt. So the code is very, very simple, and it makes it very much easier. When you log in with SECURABLE, we create a client principal for you, and with the user data as part of the client principal properties, which you can interrogate and use. We also have an Angular SDK for anyone writing Angular stuff. The SECURABLE UI uses the SECURABLE SDK to talk to SECURABLE backend. So again, we're dog fooding as such. PASOE integration. You have one configuration in PASOE now, allowing you to use any authentication system supported by SECURABLE. So username, password, Active Directory, Azure, Auth0, whatever, is one configuration in PASOE, because the SECURABLE system itself is an OIDC provider. So you configure PASOE to use SECURABLE, and then SECURABLE will generate whatever it needs. The OIDC tokens are verified, so the tokens that we produce for authentication can again be set up to expire or be revoked after a period of time. And this is all done through standard PASOE Spring. So there's no extra modules, there's no add-ons, there's no extra binaries or anything like this. The OEA BL security properties file, that's a mouthful, is automatically generated by a call to SECURABLE. So you can set up the template in SECURABLE and have all the security details automatically filled in for you. So when you deploy your PASOE system, you can just make one simple call and get the configuration done for you, which is quite handy. And what happens then is that the PASOE or Spring delivers a sealed client principal into you with your user information. So your application receives a sealed and signed client principal for you to use to identify the user. And again, the CP holds the entity, not the individual authentication of that user. So Thomas is identified as the user, and he was logged in using Active Directory or using Azure. So again, it makes managing the users very simple and very easy. So one user but multiple authentication sides. Moving on to policies and ACLs. So a policy is a collection of permissions or capabilities, as we call them. So you can define who has read, create, update, delete, and list, which are obviously the HTTP verbs that we have. So when you make a call to a certain point, you can say who has permission to access this path with this capability. So can he read, can he create, can he delete, update, or list? Each group can have any number of policies, and obviously each group has any number of users, and its most restrictive wins. So if you haven't defined any permissions, you won't be able to do anything. If you only define a read on a particular path, you won't be able to create or update or delete, and so on and so forth. So it becomes very basically your system's locked down until you start allowing permission, rather than the other way around, where you start finding holes. And again, we've been dog fooding this ourselves by locking SECURABLE down entirely and then defining the permissions that we needed to be able to access those particular parts. And again, from the SDK, you can just query the capabilities. So you say, this is the path and this is the user. What can they do? And SECURABLE will then return a list of the capabilities that that person can do. Now, you can then use that to turn on or turn off certain features in the UI, for example. We've got a couple of screenshots a bit later that show you from a user logging in, user A or user B, whether certain buttons are enabled, disabled, or hidden. So not only functions, but the UI can be defined by your ACLs and capabilities. Sorry. So there's a lot that's gone into SECURABLE. I know this has been a fairly quick run through, but I know you guys are running slightly late, and we wanted to leave a little bit of time for Thomas to do some demos and stuff. We can show some screenshots, and Thomas is going to demonstrate how we spin it up and how it looks. And if you guys have any questions after, then sorry, excuse me, then please feel free to do so. So at this point, I think I'll hand over to Thomas, if he's there.
I am. Thank you very much, Julian. Okay. So we've covered. I am going to start sharing my screen here. Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground here, and Julian's talked a lot about the internals of SECURABLE and what SECURABLE is. I just want to very quickly take you through a few things to show you how we spin up a SECURABLE instance, how we get started with that, and then show you some of the bits and pieces that Julian's talked about. We're not going to cover all of them. We're not going to have time for that, but we'll cover some of them, and we're more than happy to do demos, and we'll also be doing some recorded screenshots and actually some getting started recorded trainings also that people can follow if they're interested. So I'm just going to jump on. I'm on my local machine here. I'm on a Windows machine. I've got the Windows subsystem for Linux on here. I've got Docker on here, and I'm going to start up a simple SECURABLE instance from scratch. And get it fired up and unsealed, so it's ready for me to start using. And that's as simple as running an initialization script, which pulls the different Docker containers that we need down, starts them up. I'm running this in Visual Studio Code, which has very nice integration with Docker and with the different tools that we're working with. And I can see over here on the left-hand side that I've got some containers that are starting up, and I've got some things that are happening. What's happened now is we've fired up one of the key things. One of our key components in SECURABLE is a system called Vault, which is a secret storage engine, and that is a complicated beast to start with and to work with. What we've really done with SECURABLE is put a lot of effort into to really take that really heavy technical complication and make it a lot easier to consume. So we've got, as part of this spin up, we started up the containers, we initialized a whole bunch of things, we pre-populated some schema in our databases, and we've also generated, I should have generated, let's see if we can, should have generated a set of keys that allows me to log into SECURABLE. I may have forgotten to clean up some things before I started this. So just bear with me whilst I reset this. Let's see if this works this time. It worked just before we got onto the call here. Okay, so I'm going to start up my containers again, and hopefully I'll get a keys file that shows me the that has all the keys that are divided into different pieces, like Julian was talking about earlier. Yep. Okay. So what we see here in this JSON file is an auto-generated file that contains the 5 different shards of the combined key that's needed to unseal the securable system that we have up here. And we also have a token to access the securable system, and then we have a password that's generated. What we also do is we automatically generate an admin user and generate the password for this user so that we can access it. So I can take this password and I can then go to my browser here, and I'm going to go to localhost port 3000. Just make sure I'm logged out here. And I now have a securable system up and running, fully prepped and ready to go. And I have a securable authentication method predefined with an admin user. I can enter my password, and when I log in, I now have access to the management UI for securable. I can start configuring that and setting that up. And we're going to go through and have a look at that on another system I've prepared for this in a few seconds. So this is really how quickly and how easily we can spin stuff up, because we've built it into Docker images and provide the securable stack as a set of containers by default. Okay, I'm just going to jump back to here and go to another section, which is the PASOE part, which we'll be talking about in a bit. But one of the things that Julian talked about was being able to generate and easily access a securable system from PASOE. And part of the APIs that we've built into this are the ability to store templates of the OE ABL security.properties file and pre-populate that with the information that's needed to access a specific instance of securable. So if I run another startup script from here, I should get, oops, for some reason that was, my initialization script has run and has generated, has taken a template from Securable and populated that with information, which basically all the key information that's needed for me to have a PASOE instance that talks to Securable is done with the section in here that has information about the validation of the tokens that we send in and the key that the PASOE Spring Security needs to use when it's communicating with Securable to validate the keys. That's all I need. That's all we need to include in our PASOE setup to be able to talk to Securable. So we'll talk a bit more about that a little later. Right, so I'm just going to jump onto a demo securable system that I've prepared beforehand. And here I've got, I've set it up so I have, as we saw on the slides, we have a securable authentication method. We also have notable our Active Directory. The Active Directory has been set up so that I've also linked the one-time password or the password generator from using the Google Authenticator in this case. I've also set up an OIDC provider, or 2 OIDC providers, one for Azure AD and one for Notable Auth. And I can log on with any one of these. So if I click on the Notable Azure AD, it will take me through the standard Microsoft authentication to Azure. I type in my password because Microsoft requires that every now and then. And once I'm logged in, I get access to the securable system. Julian was talking about having different each entity having different identities. And if we look at my user here, or my entity, you'll see that I have multiple ways of logging in for the same user. So my user, Thomas, is able to log in either through an Auth0 authentication provider, Azure AD, SECURABLE, or the notable Active Directory that I've set up here. So we can have, each user can have multiple identities, and you specify that. If you're using the APIs or the SDKs to call, you'd pass in username and password and include the authentication service that you want to be validating against. So just a very quick look at how that's set up. I have for Active Directory, we have a setup here where it's really a question of going in and setting some information about the Active Directory, the query that you're going to use to connect up and look up users and get detailed information about. But it's actually very little information you need to set up to be able to use Active Directory as one of your authentication sources. OIDC and OAuth2 covers a lot of breadth and allows us to do things like Azure AD. Again, not very much that needs to be set up. It's a very simple process compared to having to work out how to do that yourself with other sort of doing it from scratch. We've got Azure AD here, and we also have Auth0, which on the back end, if we use Auth0, also gives us access to a whole bunch of other different authentication mechanisms like Google and there's a lot of other plug-in authentication providers that we can add to this. That's a quick sort of look at the authentication parts. The dynamic secrets and how we use that, we'll have to leave that for another excuse me, for another session, because we don't really have time for that. Julian mentioned that we have everything is API based, so really all the complex functionality that's built into SECURABLE we have wrapped around a set of standard REST APIs, and there's a fully documented Swagger UI or Open API that describes and shows how you can use all of the different APIs that are part of the SECURABLE stack. So on the demo system that I've set up, we also have a PASOE instance fired up, and PASOE running, of course, in a Docker container. And if I go to this page here, you'll see I have the PASOE container up and running. But if I try and access any data, for example, going to get customers' data from my API here, I get an error message. I get an authentication error message here because PASOE is not letting me in. We've got the PASOE instance and SECURABLE talking to each other, and because there wasn't any token that had been picked up from SECURABLE that was being passed in, Spring is unable to validate that and doesn't let us in to get to the data. So we need to be able to validate, get a token from SECURABLE and include that in the authentication header that's being passed in to get data from PASOE, simply by putting in the OE ABL securities properties file, maybe tweaking the permission CSV file that gives you access to different resources in your PASOE setup. But that's part of the sort of standard setup that you configure. Once you do that, we have a simple web application here that just to demo this. This is a very simple Angular web application that is using the SECURABLE SDK that we've also built for Angular, and it's picked up in the UI here that I have the different authentication mechanisms. So I'm going to log on just as my SECURABLE user here, and when I log in, I've now logged into using the SDK. The SDK application, the Angular application here now has a token, and whenever it makes requests to the PASOE application, it will include the token from the logged in user as part of the payload, as part of the request that gets passed to PASOE, so that PASOE can validate that token and check and see whether we have access or not. So if I now click on customers, I get data, because I'm passing in a valid logged in token, I now get data getting fed back from PASOE, and that I can use in my application. Very simple, very easy to use. If I go to here and look at the About Us page very quickly, one of the things that we can, if I jump back again, we have a small web handler API just to show the data that is available on the ABL side of the of this equation. So once we logged in, once we passed in, you'll see here we have this is some session information that we're showing from the client principal, and we can see that the groups, we can see the identity of the user. We've got the different groups that I'm a member of. We can see the token, the SECURABLE token that we can pick up as some extra metadata that allows me to make. Once we have that information available, you can use the ABL SDK on the back end to make calls to SECURABLE, to encrypt data, to get secrets, to store secrets, to log on, to get tokens to log on to external services and so on. So all of that happens automatically without having to do any special stuff except set up the security between PASOE and SECURABLE. I think that's what I know. We're pushed on time, so I think that's what I'm going to cover here. Julian, anything I missed?
No, obviously, being able to show the credentials and stuff, as you said, will have to come at a different time. But maybe if you show some of the screenshots from the SDK and buttons and stuff like that, so I think we've got about 5 minutes.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to pass that back on to you, because talking about that, you've written the SDK, so so if I jump off, stop screen sharing, and Julian, if you just take over and finish off. One of the things that we should point out, I know that you guys have seen some stuff on security and about OpenEdge Authentication Gateway earlier today, and one of the key things that that we're in terms of positioning SECURABLE is that SECURABLE is not a competing product to Authentication Gateway. It's a possible authentication provider that Authentication Gateway, PASOE, or your application can use to heighten security and make all this complicated back-end integration so much easier. That's really what we're trying to do here. Okay.
Thomas?
Yes.
Before you're coming to your end, Mike, or to the end of your presentation, Mike Lever has a question in the chat. He says they're using Node Passport for security, and how does SECURABLE compare to Node Passport? Would it be a suitable replacement?
It certainly would be a suitable replacement. Again, because we're using our own SDK, we have authentication guards, and internally you could use Passport to verify either the OIDC or however you wanted to use it, because obviously SECURABLE has any number of authentication methods. So Node Passport could just plug into that provider.
Mike, if that doesn't answer your question, post a question or post a follow-up.
Or reach out to us afterwards. We're happy to continue the conversation on email or set up separate demos. If any of you want a closer look or something, we can do that.
I mean, we use Node all the time. So yeah, it's all part of our system. So any Node app we write, we're using SECURABLE as part of that.
Okay, let's just take the last few slides, Julian. So we've covered.
Can you see the screen?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So the Angular SDK is, as I say, very simple. We just import it. You got the login component, and away you go. And not just the login component, every part, every API that's defined for SECURABLE is available as an Angular service. For OpenEdge, here's a quick example. As you can see, we're just creating a new SECURABLE API, and then line 15, we're logging in using user code and password. If you don't specify a provider, it defaults to the SECURABLE authentication system, and then you can just grab the client principal. So literally 3 lines of code to handle all of that for you. I mentioned earlier about cubbyhole, about token secrets. So line 16 there, we're getting the path foo beep, and you can show that we get some data. You add the some extra thing, and then you set the service. So just get and set to read and write secrets. This is very, very simple and easy. With ACLs here, you might not be able to see the screen so easily, but user A has a certain amount of features. You can see the path and the features they've got. And user B, you can see his buttons are slightly different. They've got different paths. So internally, all we're doing is checking that code. So here's the path I want to check. What capabilities do they have? And SECURABLE returns whether you can create, delete, update, list, read, whatever, based on those capabilities. So you can pass in any number of paths that you want to check, and it just returns an array of capabilities for that. So very, very simple to use. Yep, built using all these technologies, all within Docker. So we use Nest and TypeORM at the back. Very, very nice, very, very useful. Obviously TypeScript as well with Angular. The Postgres database. So all of these stacks, the Postgres, the console, Vault, the application itself, the front end, the back end, everything was spun up by Thomas when he just did init.sh. So it's all fired up. The databases are all created. They're all set up, initialized, everything like that in the couple of seconds that you saw it took to create that. So that's as far as we've done on this boring subject, but hopefully you'd found it interesting.
Well, thank you, Julian. Thank you, Thomas. I'm not seeing questions in the chat. Maybe I can very briefly report from our own experience with that, and I would do it in German. Wir haben vor einigen Wochen mit den beiden ein sehr schnelles Proof of Concept abgehalten innerhalb von wenigen Stunden, und ich rede da eher über 2-3 Stunden als Richtung ganzen Tag, waren wir in der Lage, SECURABLE sowohl am Backend in unseren PASOE als auch am Frontend in unserer Angular-Anwendung so einzubinden, dass wir in der Login-Maske neben dem konventionellen Username und Passwort halt eben dann auch die von vielen unserer Kunden gefragte Integration mit dem Office 365 Login hatten. Ganze, weiß nicht, 2-3 Stunden lief es, und dann nochmal dieselbe Zeit, um es vielleicht ein bisschen runder zu machen. Auf unserer Seite dann auch so ein bisschen Parametrisierbarkeit einzuführen, dass es mit oder ohne SECURABLE funktioniert. Aber die Einfachheit der Nutzung in dem komplexen Thema war wirklich beeindruckend. Gut, ich sehe immer noch keine Fragen im Chat. Dann würde ich sagen, kommen wir damit auch zum Ende des heutigen Tages und damit dann auch eben der Online-Konferenz der FUG. Ja, ich hoffe, es hat Ihnen Spaß gemacht, hat Ihnen interessantes Wissen vermittelt, war damit auch dann ein guter Ersatz für eine Konferenz, die wir eigentlich Ende April in Köln geplant hatten. Ich denke, in absehbarer Zeit oder in nicht allzu weiter Zeit werden wir wieder in der Lage sein, mit der PUC irgendwie vor Ort Konferenzen abzuhalten, wo auch immer. Ja, bis dahin würde ich mich über Feedback freuen, Rückmeldungen, jede Form von Kommentaren an die E-Mail-Adresse des Vorstands der PUC, die vorstand@puc.de, da haben wir sie. So, und damit würde ich Sie dann jetzt alle in die wohlverdiente Mittagspause entlassen. Danke sehr und bis bald.
Ja, vielen Dank.